The air in the Harrison family's Newton mansion was always meticulously controlled. A perfect 72 degrees, regardless of the blizzard raging outside. But tonight, on New Year's Eve, the chill wasn't from the weather. It was the familiar, sterile cold that emanated from the polished marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, and the perfectly arranged furniture. For the past 20 years, this annual party has been a ritual I've never quite belonged to. My name is Arthur Hayes, I'm 47, a structural engineer. And in this world of inherited wealth and social artifice, I am an anomaly. My wife, Sarah, a vibrant and compassionate woman who is the only true warmth in this house, was a whirlwind of motion. She moved with the grace of someone who had been doing this her entire life, a skill she learned from her mother, Eleanor. Her face, flushed with a mix of excitement and anxiety, was a canvas of conflicting emotions. She caught my eye as I stood, a silent sentry by the grand staircase. "Arthur, please don't just stand there like a statue," she whispered, her smile a little strained. "Circulate. Aunt Carol is asking for you, and for heaven's sake, try to talk to Thomas about something other than the bridge project." I gave her a weary smile. Talking to Thomas, Sarah's older brother, was an exercise in futility. He was a stockbroker, a man who spoke in percentages and market trends. His world a constant, frantic race for more. Our conversations, if you could call them that, were a series of disconnected monologues, where he would talk at me about his latest deals, and I would nod, my mind drifting to the more tangible, more honest world of steel and concrete, to the feeling of a blueprint coming to life under my watch, to the honest weight of a girder. My own world felt so far away tonight. Just a week ago, I was on a construction site overseeing the installation of a new foundation for a bridge that would span the Charles River. I was in my element, the raw power of the machinery, the earthy scent of fresh-poured cement, the easy camaraderie with my crew. That was my reality. This was a stage play, and I was a reluctant actor playing a bit part. I was the son-in-law who had married up, the working-class boy who had somehow convinced the Harrisons' golden girl to love him. In their eyes, I was not a man of accomplishment, but a man of luck. My father-in-law, Robert Harrison, was holding court in the grand living room, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of starched shirts and firm handshakes. A retired judge, his judgment extended far beyond the courtroom. His eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the room, assessing, evaluating. When they landed on me, they seemed to linger for a moment, not with warmth or recognition, but with a kind of mild disappointment. A silent question hung in the air, one that had been there for 20 years. What exactly was I doing here? I knew the answer, of course. I was here because of Sarah. I loved her, and she loved me with a fierceness and a loyalty that had sustained us both. But in the eyes of the Harrison family, love wasn't enough. You had to have a certain pedigree, a certain level of wealth, a certain way of carrying yourself. I, a man who had put himself through college on a scholarship and a series of back-breaking part-time jobs, who had built his career one brick at a time, simply didn't fit the mold. I was the square peg in their perfectly round hole. As the clock crept closer to midnight, the tension in the air thickened. The conversations became more animated, the laughter a little louder, a little more forced. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, a woman who had perfected the art of the passive-aggressive commentary, glided over to me. Her voice, like silk over a cheese grater, sliced through the noise. "Arthur, dear," she said, her perfect smile not reaching her eyes. "I do hope you're enjoying yourself. I was just telling some of our friends that you're an engineer. So fascinating." The way she said "fascinating" made it sound like a euphemism for uninspired, a career choice on par with a birdwatcher. I offered her a tight smile. "It's a good life, Eleanor. I build things that last." She merely smiled and drifted away, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more interesting, someone with a more impressive title. My words, as always, had fallen on deaf ears. I watched as Robert and Thomas huddled together, their heads bent in conversation. They were a study in inherited power and privilege. Thomas, with his easy confidence and expensive suit, was a younger version of his father, the heir to the family's social and financial dynasty. I knew that tonight, like every other New Year's, would culminate in a series of toasts to the family, to success, to the future. And I knew with a certainty that settled in my gut like a stone that I would be left out. I was a ghost at their banquet, a shadow in their light. The last few minutes to midnight felt like an eternity. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft jazz music, it all blended into a single, suffocating sound. I found myself looking at my reflection in the dark window, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance. I saw a man who had achieved success on his own terms, a man who had built a good life, but who still felt like an outsider in the one place he should have been accepted. At exactly 5 minutes to midnight, Robert Harrison cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. He raised his crystal glass, a wide practiced smile on his face. "To the year that was and to the year that will be," he boomed. "To family, to the incredible year my son, Thomas, had on Wall Street, and to the future of the Harrison legacy." Glasses were raised and a chorus of "To the Harrisons" echoed through the room. Robert looked at Thomas with paternal pride, and Thomas returned the look with a smug smirk of satisfaction. The toast was a statement, a declaration of who mattered. And I, standing there with my own glass of scotch, was simply a witness, an afterthought. Then Robert looked around, as if searching for another person to honor. His eyes landed on me for a brief, dismissive moment, then moved on to some distant relative who had just returned from a trip to the Caribbean. A new toast was made, a new person was celebrated. My heart, already heavy, sank even lower. It was a small thing, this deliberate exclusion. But it was part of a larger, more painful pattern, a constant reminder that I was not one of them. The years of quiet insults, the backhanded compliments, the feeling of being tolerated rather than welcomed, it all culminated in this moment, the moment when I realized I was invisible. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The cold, sterile air of the mansion seemed to recede, and a hot, fiery resolve took its place. I had been silent for too long. It was time to say something, to be seen, to be heard. I took a deep breath, the scotch burning a path down my throat. The time for New Year's platitudes had passed. It was time for the truth. I raised my glass. The silence was the loudest sound in the room. It was not a reverent silence, but a tense, expectant one. I could feel the 100 pairs of eyes on me, a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and annoyance. Robert Harrison's smile had vanished, replaced by a tight, rigid frown. Sarah, from across the room, looked at me, her eyes wide with a plea I understood all too well. "Don't cause a scene." But the time for quiet diplomacy had passed. My feet felt rooted to the polished marble floor. My hand, holding the glass, was steady. I raised my own glass, not with a grand gesture, but with a deliberate, slow movement. My voice, when it came, was not a boom like Robert's, but a calm, clear statement that cut through the remaining hum of conversation. "I'd like to propose a toast as well," I said. My words hung in the air, a small rebellion against the carefully choreographed evening. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd, quickly silenced by the intense glare of my father-in-law. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting from me to his father. They were both waiting for me to make a fool of myself, to offer some trite, clumsy sentiment. I wouldn't. My goal was far more subtle and far more powerful. I was going to tell them a story. My story. "Back when I was a kid," I began, my gaze fixed on no one in particular. "My father worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He was a carpenter by day and a mechanic by night. His hands were a testament to a life of hard work, calloused and scarred, with nails that were perpetually dark with grime, no matter how hard he scrubbed them. We didn't have much. No chandeliers, no fine art, just a small house in Quincy that always smelled of sawdust and lemon polish." I paused, allowing the images to form in their minds. The contrast between my childhood and the world they inhabited was stark, and I could see it on their faces. Some looked away as if pained by the lack of grandeur. Others, particularly some of the younger cousins, leaned forward, a flicker of genuine interest in their eyes. The usual hum of the party was now replaced by a rapt, if bewildered, silence. One Christmas, my younger brother, David, had his heart set on a particular toy, an elaborate model train set that cost more than a week's worth of groceries. My mother told him it was out of the question. My father, though, he just listened. He said nothing. A few days before Christmas, he came home from his second job. his hands stained with engine grease. He walked over to the living room and put a small wrapped box on the table. I could feel Sarah's hand on my arm. She was close now, her face a mask of concern and support. She knew this story. She had heard it 100 times, and she knew the simple, profound love that it held. On Christmas morning, I continued, David unwrapped the box. It wasn't the train set. It was a beautiful, hand-carved wooden replica of a train. My father had spent his nights after a full day's work in his shed, painstakingly whittling and sanding and painting. It didn't have a motor, but it had something better. It had love. My brother played with that train until he was a teenager, not because it was the one he wanted, but because it was made for him with time, effort, and care. A cough from the back of the room broke the silence. Thomas looked at his watch, a signal that he was bored. Robert just stared, his expression unreadable. But the room was different now. My story had created a bubble, a small, quiet space where their usual rules didn't apply. I wasn't talking about money or status. I was talking about something far more valuable. I was talking about worth, the kind of worth that can't be bought. I looked at Robert. As a judge, you would know that the law is not about what is most expensive, but about what is most just. In my world, a thing's value is not measured by its price tag, but by its purpose and the integrity of its creation. That train, I said, my voice softer now, was built on a solid foundation, on the kind of love that builds a home, not just a house. It wasn't about the cost, but about the purpose. It was about creating something that lasts, something real. I looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. Her toast, I said, raising my glass a little higher, to all the things that are built with purpose and with love. I drank, a long, slow sip of my scotch. The air was thick with the weight of my words. I had said it without saying it. I had called out their superficiality without a single accusation, and now the ball was in their court. I stood, a testament to a different kind of strength, a man who had built his life on his own 2 feet and who was no longer afraid to show it. The silence was deafening, a vacuum in which no one seemed to know how to move or what to say. The sound of a single, slow clap broke the silence. It came from a corner of the room, from Sarah's elderly cousin, a man I barely knew, a retired professor who always seemed out of place at these parties. His clap was a small, defiant act, a vote of approval that hung in the air like a ghost. Then a few others joined in, a scattering of hesitant applause from a few of the younger cousins and their spouses. The Harrisons, however, remained frozen in place, their expressions a study in shock and displeasure. Robert's face was a portrait of contained fury. He wasn't used to being upstaged, especially not by me. His silence was more intimidating than any outburst. Thomas, my brother-in-law, had a thin-lipped sneer on his face. He leaned over and whispered something in his father's ear, probably a dismissive comment about my sentimentality. I knew my story had struck a nerve. It wasn't just a story about a train. It was a story about a way of life, one that was completely foreign to them. My father had taught me that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the strength of your character and the integrity of your work. He wasn't a structural engineer, but he built things that lasted. He built a family on a foundation of respect and sacrifice. He was the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back, and then, if you needed it, show you how to patch it up yourself. He taught me the true meaning of a craftsman, someone who pours their heart and soul into their work, no matter how humble. I remembered a specific summer, the kind of sweltering Boston heat that makes the air feel thick and heavy. My father was building a new porch for our small house. He was meticulously measuring, cutting, and nailing. I was about 10 years old and wanted to help. I grabbed a piece of wood and started hammering a nail into it, but I was clumsy, and the nail bent. I tried to pull it out and straighten it, but it was no use. In a fit of frustration, I threw the hammer down. My father, wiping sweat from his brow, walked over to me. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He picked up the bent nail, put it in his pocket, and picked up the hammer I had thrown. "A good carpenter," he said, his voice soft, "doesn't just know how to build, he knows how to fix, and he knows how to use every tool and every material, even the ones that seem flawed." He then showed me how to use the claw of the hammer to carefully pry out the nail. He straightened it with a few taps. "A bent nail can still build a home, son," he said, "as long as you don't throw it away and you know how to use it properly. Nothing is ever truly useless." That lesson stuck with me. It was a metaphor for life. Nothing is perfect. People get bent out of shape. Relationships get strained. But if you're willing to put in the work, to fix what's broken, instead of throwing it away, you can build something strong. That was the essence of what I was trying to convey tonight. The Harrisons, it seemed, would rather throw away a bent nail than take the time to fix it. They had no interest in the imperfections, only the polished, finished product. My words had created an uncomfortable silence that no amount of polite chatter could fill. I could see Eleanor, my mother-in-law, whispering furiously to her sister, her eyes darting between me and Sarah. The air was thick with judgment. My story, meant to build a bridge, had instead become a chasm. Sarah finally came to my side, slipping her hand into mine. Her grip was firm, a silent message of support. She wasn't looking at me, but at her family, and I could feel her conflict. She was torn between her love for me and her ingrained need to please her parents. Robert, ever the master of social recovery, finally spoke. "Ahem," he cleared his throat, his voice regaining its judicial authority. "Well, an interesting story, Arthur. A fine example of working with one's hands. Now, if you'll excuse us, a few of our guests are leaving. Let's make sure they get their coats." The message was clear. My time was up. The topic was closed. The party would return to its pre-programmed schedule. The Harrisons had just dismissed a deeply personal, emotionally charged moment with the same detached politeness one would use to send off a caterer. I watched as Robert and Thomas herded a group of wealthy, important-looking people towards the foyer, their smiles perfectly in place. They had successfully swept the mess under the rug, but I knew the stain was still there. And so did Sarah. Her grip on my hand was still tight, but her gaze was distant, as if she were seeing her family for the first time. The silence in the room had ended, but the silence between us, the silence of two people who had just seen a painful truth, was just beginning. The party started to splinter. Some guests, sensing the change in atmosphere, began making their polite goodbyes. Others, particularly those who had known the Harrisons for decades, went back to their conversations, pretending that my little speech had never happened. It was a remarkable display of social amnesia. The Harrisons were masters of it, the ability to simply erase anything inconvenient or unpleasant. I stood there with Sarah holding my empty glass. The quiet murmur of the crowd filled the void where my words had been. I felt a sense of both relief and unease. Relief that I had finally spoken my truth, and unease about the inevitable fallout. Sarah led me towards a quieter part of the house, a small library filled with old leather-bound books. She didn't say anything at first, just sat on a plush armchair and gestured for me to sit on the one opposite. The silence between us was different from the silence in the living room. It was not a silence of dismissal, but a heavy silence of unspoken questions and raw emotions. I could feel her conflict, the weight of her entire life of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Finally she spoke, her voice a low whisper. "Arthur, what was that? I'm proud of you, but what was that?" I looked at her, trying to find the words. It was the truth, Sarah, my truth, the one they have spent 20 years refusing to see. "I know it was your truth," she said, a hint of frustration in her tone. "But why tonight, in front of everyone? You know how they are. They'll never forget this. You've just made everything so much harder." Maybe it was already hard enough, I countered, the words coming out with more force than I intended. Maybe it was the only way to make them see. They ignored me, Sarah. They toast to everyone except their own son-in-law. My own existence seems to be an inconvenience to them, an embarrassing stain on their perfect social tapestry. I couldn't be a ghost anymore. Her face softened. I know they do. I'm sorry. I really am." She stood and walked over to a window, looking out at the cold, dark garden. "I hate it too. I hate the way they treat you, the way they treat everyone who isn't one of them. But what did you hope to achieve? Do you really think a few words could change them?" "No," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. No, it won't. But I had to try. I had to let them know that their world isn't the only one. That my world, the one I built with honesty and hard work, is just as valid. I told a story about my father, but really, I was talking about my work, about being an engineer. She turned from the window, her brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? As an engineer, I explained, you learn that the most important part of any structure is its foundation. It's the part no one ever sees. It's buried in the dirt, unseen and unappreciated. But without it, nothing else stands. The beautiful building, the elegant bridge, it all collapses. It's a house of cards. I walked over to her, taking her hands in mine. The Harrisons focus on the shiny facade. They're so concerned with the polished exterior, the grand parties, the social status, the legacy, they forget about the foundation. Their family is built on appearances. It's a beautiful building, but the foundation is weak, Sarah. It's hollow. It can't withstand a single storm. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a dawning realization. And your family? My family had nothing but a solid foundation, I said, a lump forming in my throat. My father, my mother, they built our lives on honesty, sacrifice, and love. It wasn't a mansion, it was a small house, but it was a home. It was real. We were poor, but we were rich in the things that truly matter. They built their legacy in me, not in a bank account, and that legacy is far more enduring. I held her hands tighter. The irony is, I'm a man who builds bridges for a living. I connect places and people. I wanted to build a bridge to your family. I've been trying for 20 years, but they don't want to meet me halfway. They're not interested in a bridge of humility. They only want one of arrogance, one that they can dictate the terms of. A single tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of profound understanding. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it before. I've been so focused on trying to make you fit in, I never stopped to think about how much it was hurting you. I was trying to patch up their flaws, and I was using you as the material." We stood there in the quiet library, the sounds of the party distant and muffled. For the first time all night I felt a sense of connection, not with the Harrisons, but with the one person who mattered most, the one person who could understand. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, the most important bridge I could build was the one between us. It was a bridge built not of steel or concrete, but of truth and vulnerability. The rest of the night was a tense, slow-motion descent into the uncomfortable silence of a family trying to pretend nothing had happened. Robert and Eleanor made a point of not looking at me. They were all too busy being gracious hosts, their smiles a little too wide, their laughter a little too loud. It was a performance, and I had just thrown a rotten tomato on their stage. Thomas, on the other hand, was full of sharp, subtle jabs. He cornered me near the bar, feigning casual conversation. "So, Arthur," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Fascinating story, really. We're all so impressed by your humble beginnings. So authentic." He used the word like a patronizing slur, as if authenticity were a charming but ultimately meaningless accessory. I met his gaze, my own expression calm. I wouldn't let him get a rise out of me. "Authenticity is a quality that's hard to fake, Thomas," I replied, taking a sip of water. "Especially in this room. You should try it sometime. It might do you some good." His smile faltered for a second, then he recovered, his face hardening. "Careful, Arthur. You're talking about my family's legacy." "I'm talking about a different kind of legacy," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "The one that's built on character, not capital. The one that's passed down through lessons, not through stocks." He scoffed, turning away to talk to another guest. The conversation was over, but the message had been delivered. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a problem, a flaw in their meticulously crafted image. A few minutes later, I noticed something unexpected. My youngest niece, Chloe, was standing near me, a quiet, thoughtful girl of about 16. She was the one who was always reading a book in a corner, never quite fitting in with her boisterous cousins. She had been one of the ones who had clapped after my speech. She waited until Thomas was out of earshot, then approached me. "Uncle Arthur," she said quietly, "that was a beautiful story." Her words were a balm on a fresh wound. Thank you, Chloe. My dad says you're sentimental, she continued, her eyes fixed on mine. But I don't think so. I think you're right. She paused, glancing nervously over her shoulder. He told me the other day that his biggest deal of the year was a triumph of willpower over a competitor. He called it a dog-eat-dog world. She shook her head. I'd rather build something with my own hands, like that train, something that is an honest part of me. I smiled. It's a different kind of satisfaction, isn't it? It's a real satisfaction, she said, her voice filled with a passion I hadn't heard from her before. My dad just talks about numbers. You talk about people, and about building things that matter. The conversation was cut short by her mother, Eleanor's sister, who came to whisk her away, a disapproving look on her face. But the words had been said. My story had not only reached someone, it had resonated. A tiny crack had appeared in the pristine facade of the Harrison family. Later, as the last of the guests trickled out, Sarah and I stood in the foyer saying goodbye to her parents. Robert and Eleanor were polite to a fault, their goodbyes strained and perfunctory. "Happy New Year, Arthur," Robert said, his hand wrapped in a cold, quick handshake. "Next time perhaps we can talk about a more profitable venture, one that doesn't cause a scene." The implication was clear. Stay in your lane. Don't speak about things that are not quantifiable. Don't be a nuisance. I simply nodded, my gaze steady. I didn't need to fight him anymore. My words had already done the work. As we drove away from the mansion, the city lights painting streaks of yellow and white on the cold night, the silence in the car was heavy. Sarah was staring out the window, her hands clasped in her lap. I reached over and took one of her hands, lacing my fingers through hers. "I know you're upset," I said quietly. But I couldn't stay silent. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think I'm just processing. It's hard to see your family so clearly, to see them through your eyes. It's like the lights just came on, and I can see all the cracks and flaws I've spent my life ignoring." She was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect sister. I've always tried to make them happy, to live up to their expectations. And I never realized how much of it was just an act. I never realized how much of it was built on nothing." She turned to me, her eyes red and full of pain. "They didn't just ignore you tonight, Arthur. They ignored the best part of me, the part of me that fell in love with a good man who builds things that last, not a rich man who talks about things that are forgotten as soon as the market shifts." I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. The foundation of our life together was built on moments like this, moments of honesty, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. The mansion of the Harrisons was a beautiful structure, but it was just a house. Our small, imperfect life was a home. And tonight we had reaffirmed that truth. We had finally started to build our own legacy, one built not on appearances, but on the enduring strength of our love. A legacy of authenticity, just as Chloe had said. The next morning, the winter sun, weak and pale, cast long shadows across our bedroom floor. The air was heavy with the unresolved tension from the night before. Sarah was still asleep, her face etched with exhaustion. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and went to the kitchen. The stillness of our own home, so different from the frantic energy of the Harrison mansion, was a welcome balm. As I made coffee, my mind replayed the events of the previous night. I felt a sense of both liberation and dread. I had spoken my truth, but at what cost? My relationship with my in-laws, always strained, had been irrevocably changed. I had, in a sense, burned the bridge I had been trying to build for 20 years. But maybe it wasn't a bridge I was meant to walk. Maybe it was a bridge to nowhere built on a foundation of sand. The sound of my phone buzzing on the counter startled me. It was a text message. A quick glance at the screen showed it was from Chloe, my niece. "Thank you for last night, Uncle Arthur. You gave me something to think about." A small, simple message, but it was a beacon in the gloom. My words had mattered. They had reached someone, and that was enough. It was a sign that the seeds of authenticity I had planted had taken root in at least one person's heart. Sarah came into the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, her hair a mess. She looked at me, her eyes still a little red, but a flicker of a smile on her face. Chloe texted you, she asked. Yeah, I said, showing her the message. I guess my story wasn't a complete failure. She reached for the coffee I had poured for her. It wasn't a failure at all, she said, her voice soft but firm. It was a necessary truth. You had to do it. For you, for me, for us. We sat at the kitchen table, two islands in a sea of silence. The calm was broken by the sharp ring of the landline. Sarah looked at the caller ID, her expression tensing. It's my father, she answered, her voice a careful mixture of politeness and exhaustion. Hello, Dad. Yes, it was a lovely party. A little bit of a cold start to the new year, isn't it? I could only hear her side of the conversation, but I could fill in the blanks. Robert Harrison was not calling to wish her a happy new year. He was calling to discuss the incident. The more Sarah spoke, the more her posture stiffened. She started to defend me, not with anger, but with a quiet dignity. Dad, you can't just dismiss what he said. He was hurt. He felt invisible. No, he didn't do it to embarrass you. He did it because he had to. Because he's been trying to be a part of this family for so long, and he's been made to feel like he's not good enough. No, I'm not saying that, but it's how it comes across. Dad, you have to understand. He loves me. He works hard. He's a good man. Isn't that enough? Isn't that what we're supposed to value? Her voice was trembling now, but she didn't back down. It was a side of Sarah I hadn't seen in a long time. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over. But now she was standing up for me and for our marriage. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was her own personal toast, delivered in the privacy of our kitchen. She finally hung up, her face pale. She sat back down, taking a deep breath. He wants to talk to you. He wants to have lunch, just the two of you. He says he wants to understand where you're coming from. My heart sank. A one-on-one confrontation with Robert Harrison was something I had dreaded for 20 years. He was a master of the verbal takedown, of making you feel small and insignificant without ever raising his voice. He had a way of using reason and logic to invalidate your feelings, turning your emotions into a sign of weakness. He says he wants to clear the air, Sarah said, her voice filled with doubt. He says he wants to understand where you're coming from. I knew better. He wanted to re-establish the hierarchy. He wanted to put me in my place. But I knew I had to go. I had to face him, not for his sake, but for mine, and for Sarah's. I had to show him that I was not afraid. Okay, I said, my voice steady. I'll go. I won't back down. I will tell him everything I've been holding inside. Just be careful, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Don't let him get to you. Remember who you are. Remember that your worth is not something he can measure or take away from you. I nodded, the words a quiet promise. I was Arthur Hayes, a man who built things that lasted, a man who knew the value of a solid foundation. Robert Harrison could build his empires on sand, but I would build mine on stone, and I would not back down. The confrontation was coming, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it. The restaurant Robert chose was exactly what I expected, a place of hushed tones, polished silverware, and discreet wealth. It was his territory, a stage where he could play the part of the powerful patriarch. I sat across from him, feeling the weight of the moment and the weight of my own quiet resolve. We ordered our food, and the small talk was as stiff and unnatural as I had anticipated. He talked about the stock market. I talked about the weather. It was a dance of politeness, a veneer over a simmering hostility. Finally, after the waiter had taken our orders, he leaned back in his chair, a man settling in for a long, necessary conversation. Arthur, he began, his voice calm and measured. We need to talk about last night. I won't pretend I wasn't surprised. Your little speech was, shall we say, unconventional. It was out of place. It was not what was expected. It was a toast, Robert, I said, my voice equally calm, refusing to let him dictate the tone of the conversation. A toast to a different kind of life, a different kind of value. He gave a tight, humorless smile. I understand you have your own ideals, and I respect a man who has worked for what he has. But your words were out of place. They were a rebuke, a public criticism of my family and of everything we've built. We are a family of influence, a family of prestige. And you, in front of all of our guests, undermined that. You made us look less than. Was it, though? I asked, looking him directly in the eyes. Or was it a simple truth that you weren't ready to hear? I didn't mention names. I just talked about my father, a man who built a life with his own hands. A man whose values are the very foundation of who I am. I talked about the things that truly last, the things that endure. And you, and everyone else in that room, reacted as if I had spoken a terrible secret. He flinched at the mention of my father. I knew it was a sensitive topic. Robert, a retired judge, a man who had made his living by passing judgment on others, was now being judged himself. And he didn't like it one bit. Your father, he said, the words coming out slow and deliberate, was not a man of influence. He did not build a legacy that will last for generations. He built a house. I built a family empire. There's a difference. We are a name. We have prestige. We have influence. Your father's life, as sentimental as you make it sound, was one of quiet, unremarkable labor. And what good is an empire, Robert? I countered, the calmness in my voice belying the fire in my gut, if the people who live in it are just employees. I'm not an employee of your family. I'm a husband to your daughter. I'm a man who deserves to be respected, not tolerated. I am not some charity case you took into your home. I am Sarah's partner, and I will not be treated like a lesser being simply because my last name isn't Harrison. He leaned forward now, his composure finally starting to crack. Respect is earned, Arthur, just as influence is earned. You walked into this family with nothing but your good intentions. We gave you a place. We gave you our daughter. And now you repay that generosity by embarrassing us in our own home. And I've earned it, I said, my voice rising just a little. I've earned it with 2 decades of quiet support for your daughter, of being a good man to her, of building a life for us that is rich in love and integrity. I've earned it by being a better man than you seem to think I am. You never had to earn anything, Robert. You inherited it. And you have the audacity to sit here and question my worth. The difference between us is that I know what it feels like to build something from the ground up, to have the calluses on my hands, to know the value of a bent nail. You have never built anything with your own hands. You just count what others have built for you. His face was a mask of furious, silent rage. He had lost control of the conversation. I had flipped the script. He had expected me to be defensive, to apologize, to grovel. Instead, I was challenging his entire worldview, his entire life's work. The waiter brought our food, and we fell into a tense, silent stalemate. We ate in silence, the quiet between us more powerful than any argument. The food, which I'm sure was expensive and delicious, tasted like ash in my mouth. He had no more to say, he had no rebuttal. I had spoken my truth, and he had no counter-argument. He was a judge who had just been handed down a verdict. Finally, as we were finishing our meal, he looked at me, his face still and controlled. I don't know what you hope to achieve, Arthur. You've only succeeded in causing a great deal of trouble. You've hurt Sarah. You've made things difficult for everyone. Was it worth it? I hope to be heard, I said simply, and I was. Maybe not by you, but by Sarah, and that's all that matters. As for the trouble, that's something you have to deal with, because I'm done being invisible. I'm done being silent. I paid for my own meal. He didn't offer. He simply sat there, a portrait of a man who had just had the foundation of his world shaken. As I walked out, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But for the first time in a long time, I also felt like I was walking on solid ground. The confrontation with Robert had left me drained, but it had also brought a strange sense of peace. I had said everything I needed to say, and the silence that followed was a space I could finally fill on my own terms. When I got home, I found Sarah waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a book in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes searching my face. "How was it?" she asked. "It was what it had to be," I said, taking off my coat and sitting beside her. I told him the truth. I don't think he's happy about it, but he heard me. I stood my ground. I didn't back down. I recounted the conversation, how he had tried to dismiss my father's legacy, and how I had challenged his definition of success. She listened intently, her face a mixture of emotions. When I was finished, she reached for my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Arthur," she whispered. "I've never seen you stand up to him like that. You were so brave. You were so honest. You were... you." "I was just tired of being quiet," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I was tired of being a ghost in my own life. I did it for us, Sarah, for our marriage. I couldn't let him keep coming between us. I couldn't let him make me feel small. Not anymore." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a sigh of relief escaping her lips. "I know. And I'm so sorry I let it go on for so long. I was so caught up in the drama, in trying to please them. I lost sight of what mattered. You mattered. We mattered. I was trying to repair their family, but I was damaging ours in the process." We sat there for a long time, not talking, just being together. The silence was not empty, but full. It was the silence of two people who had just come through a storm and were now standing on solid ground. The next few weeks were tense. There were no phone calls from Robert or Eleanor. Thomas didn't text or call. It was as if we had been excommunicated, but it was a peaceful excommunication. For the first time in our marriage, we didn't have to navigate the holidays or our lives around the unspoken rules of the Harrison family. We could simply be ourselves. We went on walks on the beach, something we hadn't done in years. We had dinner parties with our own friends, people who knew and loved us for who we were, not for who we were related to. We talked, really talked, about our future, about our dreams, and about the family we were building together. One day I got another text message. It was from Chloe, my niece. It was a picture. The picture was of a small wooden birdhouse she had built. The craftsmanship was simple, but the lines were straight and the proportions were perfect. The caption simply read, "Building things that last." A smile spread across my face. My words had not just resonated with her, they had inspired her. She was building her own legacy, a quiet rebellion against the superficiality of her parents' world. It was a small victory, but it meant more to me than 100 toasts from Robert Harrison ever could. It was a testament to the fact that my message, my core belief, had found its way through the cracks and into a new generation. Sarah had also taken a step. She had a long private conversation with her mother, Eleanor. I didn't know the details, but I knew it was difficult. Sarah told me later that she had told her mother that if she couldn't accept me, she couldn't have a close relationship with her either. It was a declaration of independence, a quiet but firm boundary. Eleanor, a woman who had always been so careful about appearances, seemed to struggle with the idea. But she was a mother, and the thought of losing her daughter was a more powerful force than the need to maintain social status. She had been polite, if distant, to me on the 1 or 2 occasions we had seen her since. The most important change, however, was in our own home. Our relationship was deeper, more honest, and more resilient. We talked about everything. We laughed more. We were a team. We were a family, not just a couple. The years of unspoken resentment and hurt had been brought to the surface, aired out, and were now healing. One evening, Sarah brought home a small hand-painted sign from a local crafts fair. It said, "This is our happy place." She hung it in our kitchen right over the table where we had our difficult conversation. I looked at it and I smiled. It was a testament to the fact that we had not just survived the storm, but had built something stronger in its wake. We were building our own foundation, one built on love, respect, and a shared understanding of what truly matters. The silence from the Harrison clan was, in a way, more telling than any angry phone call. It was their ultimate form of punishment, the cold shoulder, the silent treatment. But for us it was a quiet relief. For the first time in years, we could breathe. We didn't have to plan our holidays around their calendar, or worry about what to wear, or what to say. We were free. Our lives, once tethered to their expectations, were now our own. Sarah and I spent the next few months rediscovering our own lives. We took long walks on the beach, something we hadn't done in years. We had dinner parties with our own friends, people who knew and loved us for who we were, not for who we were related to. We talked, really talked, about our future, about our dreams, and about the family we were building together. The conversation that had started with my toast had opened up a floodgate of communication between us. Sarah confessed to me how much she had been hurt by her family's dismissiveness of my life and my work. She told me about the subtle pressures she had always been under, the feeling that she was constantly failing to live up to her parents' impossibly high standards. I listened and I understood. Her pain was my pain, and for the first time, we were truly a united front. One evening, after a particularly pleasant dinner with some of our friends, we were washing the dishes together. The silence was comfortable, filled with the clinking of glasses and the soft running of water. Sarah turned to me, a serious expression on her face. "I need to apologize to you, Arthur," she said, her voice low. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For everything," she said. "For not standing up for you sooner, for trying to make you something you're not. I was so caught up in being a Harrison that I almost lost sight of being a Hayes." She smiled, a sad but beautiful smile. "I let their approval become more important than your happiness. I tried to make you fit into their world, and I never stopped to think about how much it was costing you, and for that, I am truly, truly sorry." I stopped what I was doing and took her hands in mine. "You don't need to apologize, Sarah. You were doing what you had always been taught. You were trying to keep the peace, but the truth is, there can be no peace without honesty. We've found our honesty now. That's all that matters. You stood up for me when it mattered most. You found your own voice. You showed me what I meant to you. It's not all that matters," she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. "Our marriage is what matters, and I almost let their expectations tear us apart. But you saved us. With that one toast, you showed me a strength I didn't know you had. You showed me what a real man is, and you showed me how wrong I was to ever doubt your place in my life and in my heart." I held her close, a wave of emotion washing over me. "I never doubted you," I whispered. "I just wanted you to see that your family's definition of success isn't the only one. My father taught me to be proud of the life I built, not the life I inherited. And I am proud. I'm proud of our life. I'm proud of our home. And I'm proud to be your husband." In that moment, standing in our small, warm kitchen, I felt a sense of belonging that I had never felt in the grand, cold halls of the Harrison mansion. The foundation of our marriage, once shaky under the weight of external pressures, was now reinforced stronger than ever. The silence from the Harrisons eventually broke, but not in the way I expected. It was a phone call from my mother-in-law, Eleanor. Her voice was hesitant, almost timid. She didn't apologize, not in so many words, but she did ask to see us. Just for a quiet dinner with no one else there. It was a small olive branch, but it was an olive branch all the same. She was, I realized, trying to rebuild her own bridge. We agreed. The dinner was stiff, but it was not a war. Eleanor asked me about my work, and for the first time she seemed genuinely interested. I told her about a new project I was working on, a school for underprivileged kids in Boston. She listened and she asked questions. She didn't judge. She just listened. As the evening ended, she looked at me, a rare, genuine softness in her eyes. "Arthur," she said, "you are a very good man. Sarah is very lucky to have you." It was not an apology. It was not an acceptance into the family. But it was a start. It was a small, fragile bridge, and I knew that we would both have to walk carefully on it, but for the first time, it felt like it was leading somewhere. A year passed. The next New Year's Eve came around. This time we were invited to a much smaller, quieter dinner at the Harrisons' home. Just Robert, Eleanor, Thomas, and us. No guests, no grand speeches. It was a different kind of event, a hesitant truce. The air was no longer icy, but it was still far from warm. It was an atmosphere of careful, quiet negotiation. The tension was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer a battle. It was an understanding. We talked about our lives. Thomas, to my surprise, asked me about the school I had been working on. He didn't ask about its profit potential. He asked about the kids. "It's a good thing, Arthur," he said. And I knew in his own way that was as close to a compliment as I would ever get from him. He was a man who only saw things in terms of gain, and he was acknowledging that I had invested in something with a different kind of return. Robert, too, was different. He was still the patriarch, still the man who measured success in dollar signs, but he was also a man who had seen his daughter and his wife stand up for something other than a balance sheet. He was a man who had been told in no uncertain terms that his way of life was not the only way. He asked me about the construction of the school, the logistics, the challenges. He was speaking my language, not his. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a small step towards a bridge he was finally willing to cross. As the clock ticked down to midnight, there were no grand toasts, no proclamations of legacy or wealth. Instead, Robert raised his glass and looked at each of us, his gaze lingering on Sarah and then on me. "To a new year," he said, his voice a little softer than I remembered. "To family." He looked at me, and his eyes held a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. "And to the things that last, the things that endure." It wasn't a perfect toast. It was not a grand apology, but it was enough. It was an olive branch, a signal that he was, however reluctantly, willing to meet me halfway. The most profound change, however, was in me. I was no longer seeking their approval. Their opinion of me was no longer a currency I needed to earn. I was a man who had found his voice. I was a man who knew his own worth. I was a man who was proud of the life he had built, brick by brick, foundation by foundation. The calluses on my hands were no longer a sign of a life beneath them, but a badge of honor, a testament to a life lived with integrity and purpose. Later that night, as we drove away from the mansion, a comfortable silence settled between Sarah and me. We were on our way home, to our happy place. Sarah took my hand, a warm and familiar gesture. "You know," she said, her voice quiet, "that was better." "Yeah," I said, a smile on my face. "It was." "I think they're finally starting to understand," she said. "Maybe," I said, my eyes on the road, "or maybe we're just finally starting to not care." And in that moment, I knew the truth. The victory wasn't in changing them. The victory wasn't in getting them to accept me. The victory was in realizing that their acceptance had never mattered in the first place. The victory was in my own self-worth. It was in my marriage, in my life, and in the quiet, enduring love of the people who truly mattered. I was no longer a ghost in the machine. I was the architect of my own life, and I was home. The mansion of the Harrisons, once a source of dread, was now just a house. Our home, built on a foundation of love and honesty, was our true legacy.